"I'm used goods now," she whispered, and the mountain man lifted the cloth and froze in place. A snowstorm roars through the Colorado highlands. A hardened recluse stumbles on a broken woman at death's door. But when he tries to help her, she hides her face and mutters a secret that shakes him to his core. Everyone in town says she's ruined, cast aside, hunted by men who'll stop at nothing to silence her. But beneath that quilt, she carries more than shame. She holds a deed to land that could change the fate of the valley forever. As church bells toll and hooves thunder through the night, their fight for dignity, justice, and survival begins. Will one man's compassion and one woman's courage be enough to stand against an entire clan of ranchers before winter and lies swallow them both? Before we dive in, drop your name or city in the comments. It reminds me that behind every view is a real heartbeat. The wind howled through the Colorado highlands like a hungry wolf, whipping snow into blinding sheets. William Boone trudged the last few steps toward his lined shack, his boots crunching through fresh powder. His day-checking trap lines had yielded little, and the storm's fury made him grateful for the shelter ahead 20 paces from his door. Something dark caught his eye against the white landscape. His heart jumped as he made out the shape of a person, half buried in the mounting snow. William rushed forward, all weariness forgotten. It was a woman, unconscious and curled tight against the bitter cold. A quilt was wrapped around her shoulders. Now dusted with snow, without hesitation, William scooped her up in his arms. She weighed no more than a fawn dot inside the shack. He gently laid her on the bearskin rug near the dying fire. William quickly stoked the embers and added fresh logs until flames leaped up, casting warm light across the cabin's single room. The woman's face was young, but drawn with exhaustion, her dark hair tangled with ice. "Miss," he said softly, not wanting to startle her, "can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, and a small moan escaped her lips. William hung his wet coat by the door and moved to the crude shelf where he kept his cooking supplies. He needed to warm her from the inside out. The broth heated over the fire. William noticed how tightly she clutched the quilt around herself, even in her weakened state. Her knuckles were white with the effort. Something about that desperate grip made his chest ache. Slowly, her eyes opened, revealing depths of pain that made William catch his breath. She looked at him with confusion, then fear, then a resigned sort of shame that seemed to age her instantly. "I'm used goods now," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm's rage outside. The words struck William like a physical blow. He'd heard that cruel phrase before, knew the judgment it carried in frontier towns. His hands stilled. Over the pot of broth as memories of his own loss, his beloved wife Sarah and their infant son washed through him. He didn't press her for details. Instead, he poured the warm broth into a tin cup and knelt beside her. "Here," he said gently. "Small sips." Before she took the cup, William bowed his head. "Lord," he prayed, his voice rough with emotion, "watch over this soul you've brought to my door. Grant her healing and peace." "Amen." The woman's hands trembled as she accepted the broth. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she managed a few careful sips. William moved back to give her space, settling into his worn chair to keep watch through the night, as false dawn painted the cabin's walls in pale gray light. She spoke again. "Maria Whitcomb," she said softly. "That's my name. My father was the preacher in Silver Creek Settlement." William nodded, understanding in the past tense she used for her father. William Boone, he offered in return. "They've branded me ruined," Maria continued, shame flooding her eyes as she stared. "Into the cup's dregs, I can't go back. I just couldn't bear their looks, their whispers." William's jaw tightened at the cruelty of it. He'd seen how frontier towns could turn on their own, how quick they were to judge and cast out. "You'll rest here," he said firmly, "at least until the storm passes." Maria's shoulders sagged with relief, though she kept the quilt pulled tight around herself like armor. William rose to add another log to the fire, watching as snow continued to pile against the door. The storm showed no signs of letting up, but for the first time in years, his lonely cabin felt like it had a purpose. As morning light struggled to penetrate the snow-heavy clouds, William stood at his small window. The drifts were nearly 2. The sill now, he studied the white landscape, remembering how close he'd come to missing her out there. Providence, he realized, had guided his steps today. leading him home at exactly the right moment to save her life. Turning back to check on his guest, he found Maria had drifted into an exhausted sleep, her face finally peaceful in the fire's warm glow. The quilt had loosened slightly in her slumber, revealing the edge of what looked like a hastily packed carpet bag beside her. William silently promised both God and himself that he would help this wounded soul find her way back to hope, just as he once had to do. Dawn crept over the mountains, its pale fingers reaching through the cabin's frosted window. Maria stirred beneath William's thick quilt, her eyes fluttering open to take in unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous night rushed back, and she clutched the warm covering tighter around her shoulders. William sat in his wooden chair, whittling at a piece of kindling. He looked up as she moved, his expression gentle. "Morning," he said softly, storms easing some. Maria's cheeks flushed with shame as she struggled to sit up. "I shouldn't. I can't stay here." She tried to rise, but her legs buckled beneath. Her weak from cold and exhaustion, William was beside her in an instant, steadying her with careful hands. "You ain't in any shape to travel, Miss Whitcomb. I'm only bringing trouble," she whispered, tears threatening. "I'm not worth the burden." "Ain't no burden," William said firmly, guiding her back to the bearskin rug. "Besides, tracks are covered, and likely will be for days." He moved to the hearth, where a pot of coffee simmered. "Best make yourself comfortable." Maria watched as he settled on a stool near the fire, pulling out a collection of metal traps that needed mending. His strong hands worked methodically with wire and springs, but his eyes stayed gentle whenever they met hers. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the pop of burning logs and the soft click of metal on metal. Finally, Maria's words came in a rush, like water breaking through a dam. "They took me 3 weeks ago," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "2 outlaws riding through town. Her voice caught, but she forced herself to continue. "They kept me for 5 days before I escaped. When I made it home, I thought," fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, "I thought they'd understand, that Thomas, my fiancé, would still want me." William's hands stilled on his work, listening without judgment. "But Thomas called off our engagement, said, I was spoiled now." Maria's fingers twisted in the quilt. "His family, they're convinced I took something valuable while I was captive. They've been hunting me ever since, claiming I owe them." "Did you?" William asked quietly. "No?" Maria's eyes flashed with a spark of her old spirit. "I took nothing but my shame and this quilt my mother made." Her shoulders slumped. "But they won't believe me." William nodded, setting aside his repair work. He moved to the Dutch oven hanging near the fire, lifting the lid to reveal a thick venison stew. "You need to eat," he said, reaching for a bowl. Maria shrank back. "I don't deserve. Ain't about deserving," William cut in, his voice kind but firm. "It's about surviving. Can't think straight on an empty stomach." The rich aroma of the stew made Maria's resolve waver. When William pressed the warm bowl into her hands, she accepted it with trembling fingers. The first spoonful brought more. Tears, not of shame this time, but gratitude for such simple kindness. They ate in companionable silence, the storm's fury diminishing to gentle snowfall outside. As evening approached, Maria's eyes grew heavy. The warmth of the fire and the first full meal she'd had in days worked their magic. And she drifted off, still wrapped in the quilt that smelled of pine and wood smoke. Later that night, William rose from his chair where he'd been keeping watch. Maria's face was hidden beneath a cloth she'd arranged carefully before sleeping, a habit born of recent trauma. With infinite gentleness, he lifted the edge of the fabric, steeling himself for whatever scars the outlaws might have left, but there were no marks upon her face, only the tracks of dried tears and the shadow of suffering in her furrowed brow. Even in sleep, she couldn't escape her pain. William's heart clenched at the cruelty she'd endured, not just from her captors, but from those who should have protected her. Kneeling beside her sleeping form, William bowed his head. "Lord," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "grant me wisdom to help this wounded soul. Show me how to be your hands and heart in this storm." He paused, watching the firelight play across Maria's peaceful features. "And Lord, help her. Find healing in your time, not man's." Rising quietly, William added another log to the fire and settled back in his chair. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white, as if God himself were covering yesterday's tracks with fresh mercy. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. Sunlight glinted off the snow-laden branches outside the cabin's window as William stirred the banked coals in the hearth. Maria sat wrapped in her quilt, watching intently as he demonstrated how to rebuild the fire. "See here," William explained, arranging small twigs in a careful pattern. "You want the kindling laid just so, with space for the air to move through." His weathered hands worked steadily, placing each piece with purpose. "Then the bigger pieces go on top. Once it catches proper." Maria nodded, leaning forward to study. His technique, like building a little log cabin for the flames, she observed softly. "That's right." William's eyes crinkled at the corners, pleased by her quick understanding. "Now for coffee, that's next most important thing in the morning." He showed her how to measure the grounds, how to wait for the water to boil just right before adding them. The familiar routine seemed to ease some of the tension from Maria's shoulders, giving her hands purpose beyond wringing themselves in worry. As the coffee perked, William brought out a pair of damaged snowshoes that needed mending. Maria watched him work for a while, then hesitantly offered, "I could help with the weaving, if you'd show me how." William handed her a length of rawhide lacing and demonstrated the pattern. Her fingers, though trembling slightly, proved nimble. At the task, they worked in companionable silence, the morning passing peaceful and quiet. But William noticed how Maria still startled at every creak of the cabin's timbers, how her eyes darted to the windows at the slightest sound. The fear hadn't left her, had only gone to ground like a wounded animal waiting for the next blow to fall. As they paused for a midday meal, William finally asked the question that had been weighing on his mind. "These men hunting you, what makes a stagecoach preacher's daughter so valuable to them?" Maria's hands stilled on her cup. After a long moment, she reached into the lining of her dress and withdrew a folded packet of papers, creased and worn but carefully preserved. She said, voice barely above a whisper, "This is what they want." William took the packet, unfolding it carefully. His eyes widened as he read the legal documentation, a deed and water rights to the old crossing station, signed and notarized in Maria's name. "It was a gift," she explained, twisting her hands together. "From old Mr. Henderson before he passed. I used to bring him Sunday dinner and read him his letters after his eyes got too bad. He said I was the only one who treated him like a person, not a burden." Her voice caught. "He wanted me to have something of my own, in case anything ever happened." William studied the papers with growing understanding. The crossing station controlled the only reliable water stop between North and South Valley. Owned it, could make or break the cattle drives through the region. No wonder Thomas's ranching family wanted it so badly. "They offered to buy it at first," Maria continued, "but I wouldn't sell. It was Mr. Henderson's trust in me, his final gift." Then the outlaws came. She hugged herself tightly. "Thomas's family must have thought I'd give it up after that. When I still refused, they started spreading tales about me, taking things during my captivity, making me out a thief as well as ruined." William carefully refolded the papers, returning them to Maria. "Ain't right," he said quietly, using shame as a weapon like that. The rest of the afternoon passed in shared work and simple meals. As dusk approached, they sat eating salt pork by the fire's low light. Suddenly, William's head snapped up, his body tensing. Maria froze, fork halfway to her mouth. The sound came again, hoofbeats, muffled by snow but drawing closer. Voices carried faintly on the winter air. Men calling to each other as they searched the ridge. William moved swiftly, dousing the lantern and pressing his rifle into his shoulder. Maria huddled against the wall beside him, her breathing quick and shallow in the darkness. They waited, hardly daring to breathe, as the riders drew nearer. "Nothing up here but old Boone's trap line," a voice called out. "No woman's fool enough to hole up in these mountains." "Check the cabin anyway," another voice answered. "We need to be sure." William's finger settled on the trigger, his jaw set. Beside him, Maria trembled but made no sound. Minutes stretched like hours as boots crunched in the snow outside, moving around the cabin's perimeter. Finally, the sounds began to fade. The riders moved on, their voices growing distant until only the wind remained. William kept his rifle ready long after the last hoofbeat died away, watching through the window as darkness settled complete over the snow-covered landscape. In the heavy silence that followed, William faced a stark realization by sheltering Maria. He'd made himself a target of powerful men who wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. The simple life he'd carved out in these mountains had just become far more complicated. The morning sun painted the snow-covered mountains in shades of rose and gold. William stood at the cabin's window, watching the pristine landscape for any sign of disturbance. The previous night's encounter with the searching riders had left them both on edge. "We need to be extra careful now," William explained, turning to Maria, who sat near the hearth. "They'll be watching these ridges." He demonstrated how to bank the coals, carefully arranging them to maintain heat while minimizing smoke. Keep the fire low during daylight. Smoke carries far in winter air. Maria nodded, her face serious as she studied his movements. "Like this?" she asked, using the poker to shift several embers. "That's right," William approved. "I need to check the ridge, see what tracks those men left. Stay inside, keep quiet." He pulled on his heavy coat and grabbed his rifle. "If anyone comes, hide." "In the root cellar," Maria finished. "I remember. Outside, the morning air, bit sharp and clean." William moved carefully through the snow, reading the story written in tracks and disturbances. The riders had indeed circled his cabin last night. At least 4 horses, maybe more. Fresh tracks led back down toward the valley. He followed the ridgeline, checking his trap lines as cover for his real purpose, ensuring no watchers remained behind. The snow revealed only deer tracks and rabbit runs. Still, the ranchers would be back. Men like that didn't give up easily, returning to the cabin an hour later. William paused at the door, caught off guard by an unfamiliar sound, singing. A woman's voice, soft and clear, lifted in an old hymn he hadn't heard since his wife's passing. The melody wrapped around his heart like a gentle hand. Inside, he found his humble cabin transformed. Maria moved about with quiet purpose, wielding a rough-made broom. The floor was swept clean, his few dishes washed and stacked neatly. She'd even gathered his scattered clothing and now sat mending a torn shirt with neat, tiny stitches. Amazing. "Grace, how sweet the sound," she sang softly, not noticing him at first. When she looked up and saw him watching, she fell silent, color rising in her cheeks. "I hope you don't mind," she said quickly. "I wanted to make myself useful." William had to clear his throat before speaking. "Don't mind at all." He hung his coat by the door, trying to ignore how the simple domesticity of the scene made his chest ache with memories. They passed the day in shared tasks. Maria continued her cleaning and mending, while William repaired his traps and cleaned his rifle. As evening approached, she prepared a simple supper from his stores, beans and dried venison. Seasoned with herbs she'd found among his supplies, over their meal, Maria broke their comfortable silence. "I haven't felt this safe since before." She trailed off, staring into her tin cup. "Well, in a long while," William set down his fork. "Safety's temporary out here," he said gently. "Those men won't stop hunting. That deed needs to be registered proper, made public record." "The stagecoach station," Maria nodded slowly. "I've never even seen it. Mr. Henderson said it's been abandoned since the war, but the location's valuable. Once the storm road's clear, we could reach it in 2 days' ride." William measured his words carefully. "Get your claim properly recorded at the county seat." Maria's eyes widened at his use of we, but she didn't comment on it. Instead, she asked, "Would that really make a difference?" "Public record's harder to dispute than paper hidden in a dress lining," William pointed out. "Might not stop them entirely, but they'd have to move careful, legal-like." After supper, William stepped outside to check the weather. The night spread vast and clear above him, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet black. He found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, praying out loud. "Lord," he whispered to the silent mountains, "I ain't asked much since you took Sarah and the baby. Figured you had your reasons." He paused, breath frosting in the cold air. "But this woman, she stirs up memories I buried deep. If you sent her my way, I need to know, am I meant to be her guardian? Help me see your path clear." The stars offered no immediate answer, but William felt a peculiar peace settle over him. Perhaps that was answer enough for now. The winter sun hung bright in a cloudless sky, warming the air just enough to soften the crusty snow. William stood in the cleared space behind his cabin, adjusting the rope halter on his old mule Bess. The gentle beast stood patient as he helped Maria settle onto its broad back. "Ain't got no proper saddle," William explained, "but Bess here's steady as they come." He kept one hand on Maria's elbow as she found her balance. "Just grip with your knees and lean forward a bit." Maria clutched the crude halter, her knuckles. "White, I've never ridden without a saddle before," she admitted, voice trembling slightly. "You'll do fine. Bess won't let you fall." William led them in a slow circle, the mule's hooves crunching through the snow. "We need to get you comfortable. Riding before we make for the station?" After a few careful rounds, Maria's grip loosened. When Bess stepped over a fallen log, Maria let out a surprised laugh, light and musical. The sound caught William off guard, warming something long frozen in his chest. He couldn't remember the last time laughter had echoed off these mountainsides. They worked their way down to the creek, where William showed Maria how to guide Bess with gentle knee pressure. The mule picked her way carefully along the snowy bank, steam rising from her nostrils in the cold air. "You're a natural," William observed, as Maria urged Bess around a bend without his help. "She makes it easy," Maria replied. "Neck." Another small laugh escaped her, as Bess snorted in apparent agreement. After the riding lesson, they turned to gathering firewood. William showed Maria how to test logs for dryness and which types burned longest. They worked together smoothly. As if they'd done this for years, William splitting the larger pieces while Maria stacked them in her arms. "The pine burns hot but fast," he explained, "while oak gives steady heat through the night." Maria nodded, arranging the wood carefully. "Like people," she mused, "some flash bright and fade, others provide steady warmth." The observation surprised William with its insight. They carried their loads back to the cabin as afternoon shadows lengthened across the snow. That evening, after a simple supper of cornbread and beans, Maria sat close to the fire, working on another of William's torn shirts. The familiar domestic scene stirred something in William's chest, and when she glanced up with a questioning look, he found himself speaking of things long buried. "Had a wife once," he said quietly, staring into the flames. "Sarah, and a little girl, Mary." He swallowed hard. Fever took them both. 7 years passed. Couldn't bear the empty house, the sympathy. Figured the mountains would be easier than memories. Maria's hands stilled in her lap. "Did it help?" she asked softly. Running away, William shook his head slowly. "Reckon you can't outrun grief. Follows like a shadow." "The wounds go with us," Maria agreed, her voice gentle. "Running just gives us new places to hurt." The truth of her words settled deep in William's chest. They sat in understanding silence until he remembered the deed papers. "Best seal these proper," he said, pulling out an oilskin pouch from his trunk. "Keep them dry and safe until we reach town." Maria withdrew the folded papers from her dress lining, handling them carefully as William showed her how to wrap them in the treated leather. The lamplight cast their shadows large against the cabin walls as they worked. When the deed was secured, Maria traced the pouch's edges with careful fingers. "When I first ran," she whispered, "I thought God led me here to die in the snow. But maybe," she looked up at William, hope flickering in her eyes, "maybe he led me here to start again instead." William nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her words. The lamp burned low, casting a warm glow over Maria's face as she tucked the oilskin pouch carefully away. Neither of them heard the soft crunch of horse hooves in the snow outside, muffled by the cabin's thick logs. A lone rider sat motionless. In the shadows of a pine grove, watching the lamps glow through the cabin's single window, after marking the location carefully in his mind, the rider turned his horse and slipped away into the darkness, leaving only tracks that the night's fresh snow would soon erase. Inside, unaware of their observer, William banked the fire for the night while Maria spread her borrowed blankets near the hearth. The quiet domesticity of their evening routine belied the danger drawing ever closer. As silent as the falling snow, the pale winter sun had barely crested the eastern ridge when William began loading his wooden sled. "Can't risk waiting," he explained, securing bundles of salted venison and dried corn. "Those riders will return, and next time they might not pass us by." Maria nodded, folding William's spare quilts with careful hands. Her face showed worry, but determination, as she helped pack their provisions. William added his tools, an axe, saw, and repair supplies they'd need at the station. "It's a fair distance," William warned, checking the sled's leather harness. "Trails, rough, even with snow packed down." He glanced at Maria's worn boots. "You sure you can manage?" "I'll manage," she replied quietly, straightening her shawl. "The Lord didn't bring me this far to fail now." William hitched Bess to the loaded sled, the old mule stamping patiently in the morning frost. He handed Maria his spare wool coat, too big but warmer than her thin dress. She wrapped it around herself gratefully, the sleeves falling past her fingers. They set out as morning mist still clung to the pines. William led Bess, the sled runners creaking over snow. Maria walked beside him, her steps determined despite the difficult terrain. When they reached steeper sections, William steadied her with a careful hand while guiding the mule around ice-slick rocks dot by midday. They'd covered several miles following the creek's winding course down toward the valley. Maria hadn't complained once, though William noticed her fighting fatigue. When they stopped to rest in a protected hollow, he showed her how to set simple snare traps. "Might catch ourselves some supper," he explained, demonstrating how to bend the flexible sapling and set the wire loop. Maria watched intently, then set her own trap with only minor adjustments needed. "You're a quick study," William observed. "Papa always said learning keeps the mind from dwelling on troubles," she replied, testing the snare's tension as evening approached. William chose a sheltered spot between two large boulders for their camp. While Maria gathered dry kindling, he showed her how to load and handle his spare Colt revolver. "I pray I never need it," she whispered, holding the weapon gingerly. "Prayer's good," William agreed, "but out here, the Lord expects us to help ourselves, too." He guided her hands to the proper grip. Just in case, they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, taking turns keeping watch through the night. Maria wrapped herself in quilts near the small fire, while William sat guard, his rifle across his knees. The stars wheeled overhead, bright and cold in the mountain sky. Dawn found them back on the trail, frost crunching under their boots. The sun climbed higher as they descended into more open country. By late afternoon, William spotted the station's weathered roof through the trees. "There she is," he said softly. The building stood solid despite its neglect, a square structure. Of sturdy logs with a sagging shake roof, two empty corrals flanked the yard, their fence rails half buried in snow. Maria stopped, gazing at the station with shining eyes. "It's perfect," she breathed. They led Bess and the sled into the yard. William checked the station's door. The lock had rusted away, but the hinges held. Inside, dust and leaves covered the plank floor. A stone hearth dominated one wall, its chimney still intact. Simple furnishings remained, a crude table, some benches, shelves along the walls. Maria immediately set to sweeping with a broom she'd brought, while William examined the hearth. The flue needed cleaning, but the stonework was sound. He built a small fire to test the draft, satisfied when smoke rose properly up the chimney. Evening approached. Maria placed a lamp in the window, its warm light spilling out across the snowy yard. She stood in its glow, finally unwrapping the oilskin packet containing her deed. "This is home now," she said softly, touching the rough-hewn windowsill. Her voice held both wonder and certainty. William looked up from where he knelt by the hearth, struck by how the lamplight transformed her face. Gone was the frightened woman he'd found in the snow. In her place stood someone stronger, someone ready to claim what was rightfully hers. He nodded, turning back to his work. "Reckon it is," he replied simply, but his heart lifted at the hope in her words. Together they worked into the evening, William repairing the hearth while Maria cleared years of debris, making the station livable again. Each task completed felt like a small victory, another step toward something new taking root in this abandoned place. The lamp burned steady in the window, a beacon of warmth against the gathering dark. Inside, hope glimmered as bright as its flame. Dawn painted the frost-covered windows in pale gold as Maria stirred the morning fire. The familiar aroma of coffee filled the station house while she worked, warming her hands over the precious tin pot William had brought from his cabin. Outside, she heard his boots crunch across the yard, followed by the steady thump of his hammer on the roof. The past days had settled into a pattern. each morning bringing new tasks to tackle. William worked methodically, replacing damaged shingles and securing loose boards. While Maria transformed the station's interior, she'd scoured every surface, hung dried herbs from ceiling beams, and arranged their meager supplies with care. The sound of wagon wheels caught her attention. Maria peered through the window to see a family approaching, a Navajo man leading a mule team stacked high with cut wood, his wife and children walking beside the wagon. William climbed down from the roof, raising his hand in greeting. "Morning." "Friend," he called out, "water's fresh in the trough if your mules need it." The man nodded, much obliged. "I am Tomas Begay." He helped his wife down from the wagon seat, while their children shyly peeked around her skirts. Maria smoothed her apron and stepped outside, carrying a plate of fresh biscuits she'd made from their dwindling flour supply. "Please share our breakfast," she offered, holding out the plate. Mrs. Begay smiled warmly, accepting a biscuit for each child. As they ate, Tomas shared news from his travels between settlements. His expression grew serious. The Mitchell ranch hands spread ugly. "Talk," he warned. "Say, a fallen woman hides here with a mountain squatter. But we know honest folk when we meet them." Maria's cheeks flushed, but she held her head high. "Thank you for your kindness. Our people understand about land rights," Tomas said firmly. "We will stop here again. Bring wood, maybe trade news." His wife nodded in agreement, speaking softly in Navajo to the children. After the family departed, Maria and William fell back into their daily rhythm. She hauled water from the creek while he repaired broken shutters. The afternoon found her stirring a pot of beans seasoned with the last of their salt pork, humming hymns as she worked. The familiar melodies brought comfort, reminding her of better days in her father's church. William paused in his work sometimes, listening to her clear voice rise and fall. The music seemed to ease something in him, softening the hard edges of his solitude. Maria noticed how he moved with less tension now, as if the station's gradual renewal mirrored his own. As sunset approached, hoofbeats announced new visitors. 2 weather-worn drifters rode up, leading a pack horse. "Hoping for shelter tonight," the older man called out. "Storms brewing yonder." Maria welcomed them inside while William tended their horses. She ladled hot bean stew into tin bowls, proud to offer hospitality. Her deed papers sat prominently displayed on the mantel, a quiet statement of ownership. The younger drifter noticed the documents. "This your place then, ma'am?" "Yes," Maria answered steadily. "Legal and proper." The older man nodded approval. "Good to see somebody making this old station useful again. Been needing a rest stop on this stretch." They talked into the evening, the drifters sharing tales of their travels. When they retired to the stable for the night, Maria felt a quiet satisfaction. Each visitor who acknowledged her rightful presence here helped cement her claim. She sat beside William near the hearth, watching the flames dance. The firelight softened his weathered features, and she noticed how much closer they sat now compared to those first fearful days in his cabin. His steady presence gave her strength, while her gentle determination seemed to wake something long dormant in him. "Thank you," she said softly, "for helping me make this place live again." William turned, slightly toward her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Reckon we're both finding new purpose here." Outside in the growing darkness, up on the ridge where pine trees cast long shadows, 2 riders sat motionless on their horses. They watched the lamplight glowing in the station windows, marking its location. After several minutes of observation, they turned their mounts and rode silently away, carrying news back to the Mitchell ranch. But inside the warm circle of firelight, Maria added another log to the flames, while William cleaned his rifle, and they shared a comfortable silence. The station felt more like home with each passing day, despite the threats that lurked beyond its walls. The first light of dawn had barely touched the horizon when shouts and the crack of gunfire shattered the morning silence. Maria rushed to the window, her heart pounding. Through the gray light, she saw flames leaping from the supply wagons left by yesterday's traders. The fire cast an orange glow across the snow-covered yard.
"Get down, William,"
commanded, pulling her away from the window. He grabbed his rifle, just as more shots peppered the station's wooden walls. Outside, angry voices rose above the chaos. "Surrender the papers, woman. You've no right to this land." Maria recognized the voice of her former fiancé's brother among the raiders. Her hands trembled, but she stood firm. "The deed is legal," she called back. I won't be driven away. Through the window, she spotted Tomas Begay's family huddled behind their wagon as raiders circled them menacingly. The children clung to their mother, while Tomas stood protective, his face tight with anger. "Leave them be!" William shouted, his rifle trained on the closest rider. "They're innocent folk." The station door burst open as their nearest neighbors, drawn by the commotion, arrived with buckets. "We heard the shots," old Jim Parker wheezed, his grown son, Thomas, right behind him. "Saw the smoke from our place." Maria grabbed a bucket. "The wagons. We need to save what supplies we can." They formed a line to the creek, passing buckets, while William covered them. The raiders wheeled their horses, shouting threats but holding back from the rifle's reach. Smoke stung Maria's eyes as she worked. Her skirts soaked with icy creek water. Several tense minutes passed as they battled the flames. The Begay family joined the bucket line, their children helping despite their fear. Slowly, they brought the fires under control, though the wagons were lost. One rider spurred his horse forward, Maria's former fiancé's brother, his face twisted with rage. "This ain't over. We'll see you in court, woman." No judge'll believe a ruined preacher's daughter over respectable ranchers. William stepped forward, rifle raised. Maria saw his finger tighten on the trigger as the rider laughed mockingly. Her heart clenched with sudden clarity. "William, no," she called out. "They're not worth the blood on your hands." William's shoulders tensed, but he held his fire. After a long moment, he lowered the rifle slightly. The raiders wheeled their horses, kicking up snow as they retreated toward the ridge, their threats echoing behind them. As the sun climbed higher, their neighbors helped salvage what they could. From the burned wagons, the Begay family shared what food they carried, refusing payment. "Friends help friends," Tomas said simply, his wife nodding as she distributed cornbread among the tired workers. That evening, after their neighbors departed with promises to return, Maria noticed William wincing as he moved his shoulder. "Let me see," she insisted, gesturing him to sit by the fire. "It's nothing," he grumbled, but allowed her to examine where he'd scuffled with one of the raiders. She applied a cool cloth to the bruising, her touch gentle. "We should pray," Maria said. "Softly?" William nodded, and for the first time they prayed together aloud, their voices mixing in the fire-lit room. "Lord, protect this place and these people," Maria whispered. "Give us strength to stand firm without hatred, and wisdom to know the right path," William added gruffly. When they finished, William turned to her. "Your courage today, seeing you stand strong, choosing mercy over vengeance. It steadied me more than any rifle could." Maria smiled faintly, touched by his words. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell outside. The station felt different now. No longer just a shelter, but something worth defending. She held the deed papers in her lap, running her fingers over the official seal. "I won't run again," she said firmly, "no matter what they try next." William nodded, adding another log to the fire. They both knew the raiders would return, that this was only the beginning of the feud. But for now, they had this moment of peace. Hard-won and precious. Maria tucked the deed safely away, then returned to sit beside William. Together they watched the flames dance, drawing strength from each other's presence as night settled over the station. The winter wind howled fiercer. As days grew shorter, inside the stagecoach station, Maria counted their dwindling supplies with growing concern. The flour barrel held barely enough for 3 more loaves, and their last lamp oil flickered dangerously low. "We'll have to make for town," William said, watching her measure the remaining flour. "Can't risk running out completely." Maria's hands trembled slightly at the thought, but she nodded. They hadn't ventured into town since she'd fled months ago. "When should we leave?" "Tomorrow at first light. It's a full day's journey by sled, and we'll need daylight for the return trip." They rose before dawn, loading the mule sled with empty sacks and jugs. The morning air bit sharp and clean as they set out. Maria wrapped in William's spare coat while he led the mule through deep snow, their breath frosted in the air as the sun climbed higher. The journey passed slowly, with William pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his trapping days. Maria found herself relaxing as they traveled, almost forgetting their destination. Until the town's buildings came into view through the trees, the street was busy with Saturday traffic when they arrived. Conversations died as heads turned their way. Maria felt the weight of hostile stares as William helped her down from the sled. "Ain't that the preacher's girl?" someone muttered. "The ruined one. Shameless." Showing her face here came another. Whisper Maria's cheeks burned, but she kept her head high as they walked toward the mercantile. William's presence beside her felt like a shield, though she saw the tension in his jaw near the hotel. A well-dressed man, cousin to the ranching family that wanted her land, stepped deliberately into their path. His face twisted with contempt. As he spat on the ground at Maria's feet, "Ruined woman," he sneered. "Trying to pass yourself off as respectable." William's hand tightened on his rifle strap, his whole body going rigid. Maria touched his arm gently, steadying him. "Let it be," she whispered. "He's not worth the trouble." Inside the mercantile, the storekeeper's wife served them quickly, barely meeting their eyes. As William loaded their purchases, Maria felt a light touch on her sleeve. The town's schoolmarm, Miss Anderson, pressed extra candles into her hands. "Some of us believe you," she whispered, glancing around carefully. "Stay strong." Tears pricked Maria's eyes at this small kindness. She squeezed Miss Anderson's hand in silent thanks before hurrying out to join William. The return journey felt longer, with tension slowly easing from their shoulders as the town fell behind. When they stopped to rest the mule, William finally spoke. "You showed real dignity back there," he said gruffly, handling their spite with such grace. "Though I wanted to," he broke off, anger still simmering in his voice. "Violence would only prove their lies about us," Maria replied softly. "Besides, I've learned that living well is the best answer to cruel words." The sun was setting when they finally reached the station. To their surprise, smoke rose from the chimney. The Begay family's wagon stood in the yard, and Tomas stepped out to help with the sled. "Thought you might need checking on," he said simply. His wife emerged from the station, arms full of dried meat wrapped in cloth. "For your winter stores," she explained, pressing the package into Maria's hands, "friends must stand together." Maria's throat tightened at their generosity. After the day's hardships, this show of solidarity felt like a healing balm. Later that night, as lamplight cast warm shadows through the station, William sat mending Maria's worn boot by the fire. She watched his careful stitching, remembering how alone she'd felt just months ago. "I never thought I'd find friendship again," she whispered, wiping away tears. "After everything, I was so sure I'd spend my life alone with my shame." William paused in his work, looking up at her. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly. "Not while I draw a breath." Maria smiled through her tears, feeling the truth of his words settle deep in her heart. Outside, snow began to fall, but inside the station, warmth and companionship kept the winter cold at bay. The ranch clan's vengeance came with the bitter February dawn. Maria woke to thundering hoofbeats and men's shouts. Her heart lurched as boots crashed against the station door. William grabbed his rifle, but it was too late. The door splintered inward. Armed men swarmed inside, waving papers and badges. "William Boone," the lead deputy barked. "You're under arrest for squatting and harboring a fugitive." "This is legal property," William protested, but 3 men tackled him. They knocked the rifle away and twisted his arms behind his back. Maria screamed as they dragged William outside into the gray morning. She tried to follow, but rough hands shoved her back. Through the broken doorway, she watched helplessly as they threw William face down in the snow. "Stop, please," she begged. But the deputies ignored her cries, landing brutal kicks to William's ribs. The sound of leather boots striking flesh made her stomach heave. William didn't fight back as they shackled his wrists. Blood from his split lip stained the snow crimson. His eyes met Maria's across the yard, filled with silent apology. Dust rose from the ridge as neighbors' wagons approached, drawn by the commotion, but they were too late. The deputies hauled William to his feet and threw him onto a horse. "This is wrong," shouted Tomas Begay, reining his horse into the yard. "They have legal right to be here," the lead deputy sneered. "Tell it to the judge. This squatter's going to jail where he belongs." Maria stumbled outside as they rode away. With William, her legs gave out beside the blood-stained snow where he'd lain. Her fingers trembled as they traced the red-flecked ice. "Maria, come inside," Sarah Begay urged gently. "You'll freeze out here." But Maria couldn't move, couldn't tear her eyes from William's blood marking the ground. The sight of it stirred something deep inside her, not just grief, but determination. "They won't get away with this," she whispered, then louder, I won't let them. Sarah helped her up, supporting her back into the station. The broken door let in bitter wind, making the curtains snap like whips. What will you do? Tomas asked, following them inside. Maria crossed to the mantel where her deed papers lay secure in their oilskin wrapping. Her hands shook as she lifted the packet, but her voice was steady. I'm going to town. I'll show these papers to every person who will look. They can't keep spreading lies if enough people know the truth. It's dangerous, Sarah warned. Those men hate being challenged, especially by a woman. I know, Maria clutched the papers to her chest, but I have to try. For William's sake, for my own. The Begays couldn't argue with the steel in her voice. They helped her gather supplies and promised to watch the station. As evening approached, they reluctantly departed, leaving Maria alone with her fears and plans. Night fell early, as it did in winter. Maria hadn't lit any lamps. She knelt in darkness beside the cold hearth where she and William had shared so many quiet evenings. The empty station echoed with absence. Lord, she whispered, her voice trembling, I'm so afraid. These men already took my reputation. They hurt William for helping me. Now I have to face them alone. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she continued praying. They'll mock me again. Call me ruined, maybe worse. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Wind moaned through the broken door. Outside, snow began falling, soft flakes glowing in the starlight. Maria watched them dance past the window as she poured out her heart. But William believed in me when no one else would. He saw past what they called me, treated me like a person worth protecting. Now he's suffering for that kindness. Her fingers traced the rough floorboards where they'd knelt together in prayer so many times. The memory strengthened her resolve. Please, Lord, she breathed, make me brave tomorrow. Help me stand before these men who despise me. Let your truth be stronger than their lies. The snow fell thicker now, blanketing the world in hushed white. Maria remained kneeling in the darkness, drawing courage from the quiet. Tomorrow would bring confrontation and fear, but tonight she fortified her spirit with prayer. Give me strength, she whispered one final time, not just for William, not just for myself, but for every person they've tried to shame into silence. The station creaked in the winter wind. Maria clutched her deed papers closer, feeling the weight of tomorrow's challenge, but beneath her fear, a deeper certainty grew. She would face whatever came. She would stand. She would speak truth to power, no matter the cost. Dawn crept over the mountains in shades of iron gray. Maria stood in the station doorway, watching frost crystals glitter on bare branches. Her hands trembled as she wrapped William's old shawl around her shoulders, but her movements stayed purposeful as she hitched his mule to the wooden sled. The creature's breath steamed in the frigid air as Maria checked the harness one final time. She'd learned well from William's patient teaching. The memory of his gentle instructions steadied her now. Just you and me today, old friend, she murmured, patting the mule's neck. In her dress pocket, the deed papers crinkled with every movement, a constant reminder of her mission. The journey into town stretched long and lonely. The sled runners whispered over packed snow, and Maria's thoughts churned with the words she would soon speak. She'd rehearsed them through the sleepless night, but they still felt inadequate against the weight of what she faced. Church bells tolled across the valley as she approached town. Their bronze voices called the faithful to Sunday service, just as they had in her father's congregation years ago, before everything changed. Before shame became her constant companion, Maria guided the mule down the main street, past closed shops and quiet homes. Horses already crowded the church, hitching, posts fine breeds that belonged to the ranching families. Her heart quickened at the sight, but she forced herself to breathe steady as she secured William's mule. The church steps had never looked so steep. Maria paused at the bottom, adjusting her shawl and touching the veil that half covered her face. The habit of hiding was hard to break, but today she would hide no more. Inside, lamplight gleamed on polished pews. The congregation had already assembled merchants and homesteaders in their modest Sunday best. Ranching families displayed in their fine clothes near the front. Maria recognized the proud set of their shoulders, the way they held themselves. Apart, whispers rippled through the church as she walked down the center aisle. She felt the weight of every stare, heard the rustle of folks turning to watch her pass. Her legs threatened to give way, but she kept moving, one step at a time. The minister paused in his preparations, watching with concerned eyes as Maria approached the front. She gave him a small nod, then turned to face the congregation, shook as she lifted her veil, but her voice remained steady. "I am Maria Whitcomb," she began, "daughter of Reverend James Whitcomb, who once preached God's word in Sterling Valley." The church fell silent. Even the children stilled, sensing the gravity in the air. Many of you know pieces of my story, or think you do. Today I speak the whole truth, plain and clear. Maria's gaze swept across familiar faces, some kind, some hostile, some uncertain. Last summer, I was taken by force from my father's home. For 3 days, I endured at the hands of outlaws before escaping. Gasps and mutters rose from the pews. Maria pressed on, her voice growing stronger. When I returned home, I carried no wounds you could see, but I was branded all the same, called ruined, cast aside by those who once claimed to love me. Her eyes found her former fiancé's family in their front pew. They stared back, stone-faced and cold. "Yet God did not abandon me," Maria continued. She drew the deed papers from her pocket, holding them high. "These papers grant me legal ownership of Cottonwood Station. They were my father's final gift before he died, meant to give me independence and purpose." The papers trembled in her raised hand. "Some here have called me squatter and fugitive. They've driven good men like William Boone to jail for showing me Christian charity. But I stand before you now, not in shame, but in truth." She smoothed the papers carefully. "I am not ruined. I am not fallen. I am a daughter of God who survived tragedy and seeks only to make an honest life, serving travelers at the station that is rightfully mine." Movement stirred through the church, shoulders shifting, heads bending together in whispered conversation. Maria saw confusion in some faces, dawning understanding in others. A few of the ranchers' wives wouldn't meet her eyes. Drawing a deep breath, Maria lifted her voice in song. The hymn verse rose clear and true, though her heart pounded. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see." The familiar words filled the church. Maria let them carry her truth to every corner, every heart. For the first time since that terrible summer, she stood unveiled before her neighbors, owning her story without shame. The last note faded into profound silence. Maria remained standing, straight-backed and still, as the congregation absorbed her testimony. Some faces had softened with sympathy. Others remained hard with judgment. But she had spoken her piece at last, and no whispered lies could take. That victory from her, William slumped against the cold jail wall, his ribs aching from the beating. Morning light filtered weakly through the barred window, casting thin shadows across the dirt floor. Every breath brought sharp pain, but he'd endured worse in his mountain years. What truly pained him was wondering if Maria faced the town alone. The sheriff's boots scraped against wooden floorboards outside the cell. William could hear townsfolk passing on the street, their Sunday shoes clicking as they headed toward church. He closed his eyes, offering a silent prayer for Maria's safety. Then, carried on the winter air, came the faintest strain of singing. William sat up straighter, ignoring his protesting muscles. That voice, he'd know it anywhere. Maria's clear tones lifted in amazing grace, the hymn she'd often hummed while working at the station. "Listen to that," muttered a deputy near the front desk. "Preacher's daughter, singing in church." More voices joined the conversation outside the jail. She showed her face today, told her whole story straight out. Them ranch folks didn't look too pleased about it neither. "Poor girl's been wronged something terrible." The murmurs grew louder, more insistent. Bootsteps approached William's cell as Sheriff Cutter appeared, keys jangling in his weathered hands. The lawman's face was drawn with discomfort. "Seems there's been some misunderstanding about your arrest," Cutter said gruffly. "Folks are asking questions I can't rightly answer." The cell door creaked open. William stood carefully, one hand braced against the wall for support. "No misunderstanding, Sheriff. Just truth coming to light at last." Several townspeople had gathered in the jail office, the mercantile owner, the blacksmith, even the schoolmarm. They watched as William limped out, the blacksmith stepping forward to offer his broad shoulder for support. "Miss Whitcomb spoke mighty brave in church today," the merchant said. "Made some of us realize we've been turning blind eyes too long, William nodded gratefully as they helped him outside. The morning had warmed slightly, though his breath still clouded in the air. More townsfolk stood in clusters along the street, talking in low voices. Many nodded respectfully as William passed. The church doors opened, spilling people onto the steps. William's heart leaped as he spotted Maria among them, her face unveiled and shining with inner light. When she saw him, she hurried forward, skirts swishing against packed snow. They met in the street, William reaching for her hand despite his injuries. Her fingers were cold but steady as they clasped his. "I should never have doubted your strength," he said softly. "You've shown more courage than any of us." Tears sparkled in Maria's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "God gave me strength when I had none left, and He sent you to help me find it again." The blacksmith cleared his throat. "Word's been sent for Judge Holt to come settle this land dispute. Proper. He's known for being minded. Meanwhile, you'll both need somewhere safe to stay," the schoolmarm added. "I've arranged rooms at the boarding house." That evening, in the boarding house's lamplit parlor, Maria gently cleaned William's cuts with warm water and strips of clean cloth. Her touch was tender but sure, like everything about her now. "The judge will see the truth in those papers," William said, wincing slightly as she worked. "Your father made certain of that." Maria nodded, wringing out the cloth. "Whatever comes in court, I'm grateful not to face it alone anymore." William caught her hand, holding it against his heart. "You won't have to. I'll stand beside you until justice is done and after. If you'll have me." Outside their window, snow began falling softly in the gathering dusk. But inside, warmth and hope glowed steady as the lamplight, as William and Maria prepared to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Together. Judge Samuel Holt arrived on a crisp morning, his black coat dusted with snow from the mountain passes. He dismounted stiffly in front of the courthouse, leather satchel bulging with documents. Townsfolk gathered to watch as he climbed the wooden steps, his boot heels clicking against frost-covered boards. Inside the crowded courtroom, Maria sat straight-backed beside William, her deed papers laid carefully on the rough table before them. Across the aisle, the ranchers lounged with arrogant confidence, their lawyers shuffling papers with practiced flourish. "This court will come to order," Judge Holt announced, his voice carrying authority earned from years' riding circuit. He adjusted, his wire-rimmed spectacles studying the documents before him. "We're here to settle ownership claims regarding the Crystal Creek Stagecoach Station and associated water rights." The rancher's lawyer rose first, spinning tales of Maria's supposed disgrace. "This woman," he declared, pointing dramatically, "abandoned her good name and any right to respectable property. She consorts with a mountain hermit, bringing shame to our God-fearing community." Maria's fingers trembled slightly, but her chin remained high. William's hand found hers beneath the table, steady and warm. Judge Holt's expression remained neutral as witnesses came forward. The schoolmarm spoke first, describing Maria's dignity despite cruel treatment. "I've seen nothing but propriety and hard work from Miss Whitcomb," she testified firmly. "She's made that station a welcome rest for weary travelers." Tomas Bege, the Navajo wood hauler, stepped up next. "My family hauls firewood past that station twice weekly," he said clearly. "Miss Whitcomb and Mr. Boone treat all travelers with respect. They've never turned away anyone needing water or shelter." More witnesses followed, drifters who'd found refuge, neighbors who'd seen Maria's quiet strength. Each testimony built upon the last, truth shining clearer than mountain streams. The judge examined Maria's deed carefully, holding the papers to the light. "These documents appear properly filed and witnessed," he declared. The previous owner, having no heirs, legally transferred title to Maria Whitcomb before his death. A murmur rippled through the courthouse. The ranchers shifted uneasily in their seats. Judge Holt's gavel cracked sharply. "This court finds in favor of Maria Whitcomb," he pronounced. "She is hereby confirmed as rightful owner of the Crystal Creek Station and all associated water rights." He fixed the ranchers with a stern gaze. "Furthermore, any harassment or interference with her property will be met with the full force of territorial law. I trust I make myself clear." The ranchers' faces darkened with fury, but they dared not challenge the judge's authority. Their lawyer gathered his papers in defeated silence. A soft cheer rose from the gathered townsfolk. The schoolmarm dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. Even the sheriff nodded in approval from his post by the door. Maria's grip tightened on William's hand as relief washed over her face. Tears sparkled in her eyes. But these were tears of joy. Justice had finally prevailed as they left the courthouse. Neighbors surrounded them with congratulations and offers of support. "We'll help repair that roof proper now," the blacksmith promised. "Won't have our station falling to pieces." "My family will continue bringing wood," Tomas added, his wife smiling beside him, and news of travelers who might need shelter. The sun was setting as William and Maria rode back to the station, surrounded by their escort of newfound allies. Golden light painted the snow-covered hills, promising spring's eventual return. At the station door, Maria paused, touching the weathered wood with wonder. "It's really mine now," she whispered. "Truly and legally mine." William smiled, seeing not just the station, but a future bright with possibility. "Home at last," he agreed softly. "And this time, you've got folks standing with you to keep it that way." Snow drifted like cotton wisps through the darkening sky as William and Maria moved from window to window, lighting oil lamps. Each flame cast a welcoming glow across the weathered boards of the Crystal Creek station. The glass panes, freshly cleaned, sparkled like jewels in the gathering dusk. "Another lamp for the east window," Maria said softly, adjusting the wick, "so travelers can see it clear from the valley road." William nodded, carrying the matches. "Reckon those lights'll guide many a cold soul to shelter." The door creaked open, letting in a swirl of snowflakes and their first evening visitors. The blacksmith's wife entered, carrying a steaming pot of rabbit stew, followed by others bearing bread, preserves, and winter vegetables. The station's main room, swept clean and warmed by the crackling hearth, filled quickly with neighbors. 3 orphaned children from the Thompson homestead huddled near the fire, their thin faces brightening as Maria ladled generous portions of stew into tin bowls. Widow Jensen and her sister brought fresh-baked bread, still warm from their morning baking. The aroma of good food and wood smoke filled the air. Tomas Begay and his family arrived last, carrying intricately woven wool blankets in rich earth tones. His wife spread them carefully on the benches, while their children helped arrange cups for coffee. Laughter echoed through the station's rooms, a sound these walls hadn't heard in years. Maria moved among her guests, refilling bowls and offering quiet words of welcome to each person. Her face glowed with joy, transforming her entire bearing. Standing before the gathered community, Maria's voice carried clear and strong. "This station will be more than just a stop for stagecoaches," she declared. "It's to be a true home for any weary traveler who needs rest. A place where all are welcome, regardless of where they've come from or what burdens they carry." Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. The schoolmarm wiped tears from her eyes, while the blacksmith nodded firmly. William watched Maria from across the room, his heart full to bursting. She had bloomed like a desert flower after rain, her inner strength and beauty impossible to deny. He crossed to her side, gently drawing her away from the others, toward a quiet corner. "Maria," he said softly, his weathered hands taking hers, "I need to tell you something that's been weighing on my heart." She looked up at him, lamplight dancing in her eyes. "You were never what they called you, never used goods." William's voice grew husky with emotion. "You've been God's treasure. All along, I see it clear as day now, how He guided you here, not just for your own healing, but for all of us." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. Without words, she placed her hand in his, fingers intertwining. The simple gesture held more meaning than any formal declaration could express. William drew her close, their embrace bathed in golden lamplight. From the main room, voices lifted in song as the gathering began, singing Amazing Grace. The familiar hymn swelled, filling every corner of the station with its message of redemption and hope. Outside, the gentle snow continued falling, blanketing the valley in pristine white. Through the windows, the station's lamps burned steady and bright, a beacon of welcome visible from miles across the darkened landscape. Each flame seemed to proclaim that here at last was a place where the weary could find rest, the lonely could find family, and those who thought themselves lost could find their way home again. If you believe stories can heal, lift, and connect, this channel is for you. Thanks for being here. Hit subscribe, and I'll meet you again tomorrow with something real. Something real.